What's up, everybody? I'm Scott Melker, also known as the Wolf of Wall Street. And today I have a very special guest for a very special conversation. It's so special to me because we've all heard about DAOs, obviously. Well, this is the first DAO that I've personally ever contributed to. I'm definitely a firm believer that if you're going to talk about something and try to understand it, then you definitely have to participate. So today's guest is Philipp Zimmerer. He is the mastermind, a core contributor behind SpoolDAO, which is the DAO that I'm talking about here, that I'm participating in. And so, Philipp, listen, thank you, first of all, for being here. But I have to say, usually when I have a guest, I'm like, they're the CEO, the co-founder, they have a title, COO, CFO. When it comes to a DAO, that doesn't really exist. So I even struggled to come up with a term to introduce you. Can you talk about why that is, why you would do it as a DAO structure and what your role is there?
Well, it's very, very important to consider the reasoning that you have for a DAO. And I think we've seen a lot of DAOs that kind of sprung up from like centralized entities. Like there's like, sure, it has DAO in the name. It says it's a DAO, but you can clearly see that there's like someone or some company that it was kind of spinned out of. And I think what's special about Spool is that it was really a group of people coming together, coming up with a plan for something, and then all like pitching in together to kind of get things started, right? But obviously you cannot just start a DAO with like a group of 50 people and expect everyone to contribute the exact same amount, right? So obviously there's like still builders within the DAO and people within the DAO that kind of execute the decisions of the DAO. But what matters to me about a DAO is that it's like started by a joint group of people with a common goal in mind, and then coming up with a plan and a strategy to get to this point together. And this is essentially what Spool is, right? It started off as a collective of people that saw the evolution of DeFi and saw the path it was going on, and then also recognized potential growing pains that might hit DeFi in the future and that needed to be solved, right? So it started as kind of this think tank, and then it kind of developed into what Spool is today, right? And I think the fact that it's a DAO and that it started off as a collective creates a great basis for what Spool eventually needs to be, which we're going to get into a little bit later, right?
Right. I think that's actually a perfect segue and probably the best time to talk about it. What is Spool? After all of that think tanking and discussion, this is what finally came. And this is a very impressive group of people. Obviously, I obviously was lucky enough to sort of be a fly on the wall watching it come together and contributing where I could, but very minimally, obviously. So of all the things in the world that the DAO could have created, this is what we came up with. So talk about what Spool is.
Yeah, so Spool sort of is a middleware, right? That basically simplifies and automates connecting to what DeFi has to offer to all of the different yield generators and ways to sort of get some sort of return on the capital that you're locking into it, and making that connection under very specific terms. And then Spool helps you automate and optimize these terms and basically manage them for you. So what it essentially does is it gives users a toolbox that's derived from the expertise and the resources that DeFi has to offer, not only like the protocols and strategies themselves, but also more qualitative inputs such as risk models and so on that help you understand what the risks are associated with all of these protocols according to our risk model providers, right? And then you can sort of mix and match that together and combine it with your own tolerance and appetite for risk, and then come up with a very, very customized strategy that from there on automates all of your yield farming and all of your capital flows under these terms that you set. So in simple terms, you're essentially front loading all your decision making. You're setting, this is what I trust, this is what I want to include, this is how I define risk, and this is how much of that risk I'm willing to take on. And then from there on out, Spool automates everything for you after your deposit, right? And I think what we want to do with that is not only help people have more agency about how they interact with DeFi, but also sort of create a toolbox, right, that allows the creation of entirely new products on top of DeFi without requiring everyone creating these products to have to start from square one and having to create adapters for all of these protocols and finding their own risk strategy and so on. We just give them all of these resources in an impartial way, an open way. That's why, again, it's important that it's a DAO, right? So it can't be censored by individuals. And we can approach DeFi in an open manner. And then these creators can use all of these tools and resources we give them to create whatever they want and integrate it into whatever product they come up with.
Right. So that's your spool, right? You go through this process, and once it's finalized, you have your spool, and that is your strategy, which is automated. Right. Correct. Just for clarity, because the name is actually really important, obviously, and that's the reason that's called such. So the question there becomes, right, yield farming, market making, liquidity providing, not the easiest things to understand for your average person, right? And so it assumes some sort of level of competence or understanding of the market to even participate at all, right? So when you come here, what if you're pretty fresh, almost completely new to it, you want to try your first sort of yield farming strategy? How can you use this sort of as a newbie, right? As opposed to someone who's understood it and done yield farming before, or is it for more advanced people?
Yeah, and I think that's already a perfect question, right? Because you're saying, well, there's new people and there's advanced people, but those are not the only two groups, right? It's kind of a spectrum. So once you embark on your DeFi journey, so to speak, I think most users keep growing, they keep learning, and they keep getting better at it. And it's important, I think, for Spool to accompany these people on their journey, and wherever they are at their journey, provide them with access to DeFi in a way that is meaningful to them, right? And so as a complete newbie, like coming into DeFi, into crypto, you might be looking for resources to learn, right? And we have, I think, a great community of content creators that help these people on their journey, right? But in your first steps, you might get really excited about all these opportunities that are presented to you, but you might not be aware of these risks yet, right? So a lot of people jump in head first, take on a lot of risk without really knowing that there's a lot of risk, because we have this sort of culture where we put like cute kind of UX over obviously things that are obviously very, very risky, right? We just attach animals to it, and we even call ourselves like apes and stuff like that, like as a joke, right? But this also leads to risk taking. So these people attach themselves to content creators, and what if we can help these content creators sort of in a completely non-custodial way to express their own farming preferences, their strategies, by creating spools and then giving users the option to sort of copy that, right? So that's one of the ways that I think someone could start their DeFi journey, is having or following someone else's strategy that is represented through that spool, right? In a non-custodial way. And then as these people learn and get used to DeFi, they might take a second look at the spool that they've joined from this content creator, say, hey, this is pretty good, but I've learned about this and that strategy, and I like that. Maybe he doesn't like it, but I like it. So I might start creating my own spool, right? And then that's the intermediate user. And then the advanced user gets maybe to the point where they're like, man, I'm in DeFi for years now. I'm an expert in the space. I might want to create a product that leverages DeFi, but I'm not really a coder, and I don't want to really gather a whole team that just creates all of this like sort of backend, all of this smart contract architecture for me to make my product work. And that person might use Spool and then use our SDK to integrate it into that product they made. So they basically leverage Spool, use Spool to leverage DeFi in the background, and then at the front end, focus on delivering a product that is like tailored for a certain user group, right? And so it's important to see what you have to offer for users, not just at one point in their journey, but throughout their whole DeFi journey. And I think that's
I think it's brilliant. I think it's really interesting. Obviously, things like copy trading are very popular already, right, for among traders. But the idea that you can kind of have a starting point, you start with that spool, and then you can customize it. Say, listen, I don't like this one part of it. Go back, sort of replace that part with a different one. And the risk management strategies, to me, are the most important part, obviously. So where do those sort of risk strategy options come into play? How are those developed?
Yeah, so it was important for us to keep risk an open topic as well within Spool, because I get this question a lot where people are just asking me, so why is there different risk models? And the answer to that, if you think about it a little bit, it becomes quite clear, because if you ask like 20 different experts in the space, well, rank these 10 smart contracts in terms of riskiness, they're not going to come up with the same answer, because they're going to judge them.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah,
They're going to judge them by different standards, right? Someone might like focus on very like qualitative things like who audited this, how many audits are there, who are the people behind the audits, or is the team public or not, are they anon, right? Which is like something that you can't really quantify, and we don't really have a lot of data yet to draw like quantitative risk models from that. Other people might just go with something like the efficient market hypothesis and just say, yeah, if the yield's high, you can probably say it's high risk, right? And if the yield's low, then risk might be lower, right? Because more people trust it. And so you have this discussion, right? And what Spool does as a DAO, it curates risk models. So everyone in the DAO, whenever they join, they will also get the chance to take a look at new risk models that are proposed. And risk models should be proposed by parties who believe themselves to be experts at risk and who think that they can bring a new perspective to the table. Because the ultimate goal is to offer a wide selection of risk models to Spool creators so they can feel that their own way of interpreting risk, which they might not be smart enough to, or might not want to put in the effort of creating themselves, but they can still recognize and relate to, right? So if you come into Spool and create a Spool, you want to find a risk model that represents what you would agree with in terms of what constitutes risk and what doesn't constitute risk, right? And for that reason, to capture an audience and to offer something to everyone, it's important to make sure that new ideas in terms of risk can be presented to the DAO, then be curated by the DAO, and then ultimately be made available for selection for people that are using Spool.
So with all the ideas in the world, why DeFi? I guess at a very zoomed out macro level, why is DeFi so important, and why is that where we're focusing?
Well, I could give you the obvious answer and say we all love DeFi, right? But that would be kind of a cop-out, because I think there's actually very serious implications in today's world that I think make DeFi relevant more than ever, and I think are going to be a reason for it to essentially blow up over the next 10 years. And that is, nobody really can ignore personal finance anymore. We live in a world where like inflation is starting to go up, and it's starting to become harder and harder to beat inflation using traditional means, right? Like if you zoom back 20 years ago, you could just chuck your money into like treasury bonds and get 7.5% on them, and you'd be fine, right? You cannot do that nowadays anymore. Interests are low, and people have to start thinking about what do I actually do with my capital? How do I save, even on a smaller level, right? Or otherwise they will get slowly disowned by inflation because their purchasing power is going down. And DeFi, compared to TradFi, offers the unique advantage of being democratic. It's on paper, it allows everyone to access the same opportunities, right? However, that's only on paper right now, because what's missing is the sort of a financial services industry for DeFi, right? So DeFi is right in terms of recognizing that the current system is broken, but just removing it is not the answer. We need to replace it. And replacing it is only possible if there's like a dynamic framework out there on which we can build a new financial services industry that is tailored for DeFi and that is fair for everyone and that allows access to everyone, not just the people that are willing to make this their full-time job, right? And I think if we can enable people to access DeFi and to capture yields that are offered in DeFi without essentially going through a traditional system where there's a lot of middlemen that are taking their cuts, leaving very little for the end user that is actually providing the capital, I think that's when we can change lives for a lot of people. I know it sounds a little bit grandiose, so to speak, but it can actually change lives for people that want to have access to ways that allow them to combat inflation and to make sure that their purchasing power, their relative purchasing power, stays up to par or even increases because they have now again options to what to do with their capital, right? What to do with their dollars that they're, or their whatever currency they have, that they're currently putting in savings where it's just lying dormant, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's why it matters.
Yeah, I don't view it as grandiose at all, honestly. It does sound that way when you think about it, but it's so obvious and basic when you sit down to consider it, that people should simply be able to beat inflation, right?
Yeah, for sure.
At the most basic level, and they should be able to do it without exceptional risk or having to understand complicated UX and UI to get there. Because, I mean, it's my opinion, this will certainly help. We're still very early in the first iterations of DeFi, right? We're nowhere near where your average person can just come in, park their money, earn a yield, know that it's safe, be insured, have, sophisticated hedging strategies, all the things that do, like, we rail against the legacy systems, but, because of the lack of access, but they do have the tools, right, that we lack.
Exactly. Yeah. And like you said, right, what you just described, everyone wants that, but everyone defines that differently. So we can't just start and make a product where we say, oh, one size fits all, right? Because first we need infrastructure that allows for the easy creation of such products, because there's so many diversified demands out there, so many different user groups that have very specific needs. And like going straight from the source, bridging the whole gap from a yield generator to these end users in one step, that's a massive undertaking and it's very inefficient. So this is sort of where the idea for Spool kind of came in, to be this sort of middle layer, a toolbox that is open, expands together with DeFi, includes new strategies, new ways to earn yield as they pop up and get vetted and tested by crypto veterans. Spool can include them and make them available to then creators and potentially also like institutions and so on, that then make these smaller tailor-made products that then target the end user, right? And the difference, if you realize that, what I mentioned here is there's multiple steps in this process that then allow a finer and finer degree of sort of separation until we arrive at the individual product that will appeal to an individual end user, right? And I think it's very important for this middle layer to exist and grow. And that's where we go full circle, right? And get back to the DAO, because such a middle layer also comes with a lot of responsibility, right? And it cannot be censored. And for example, if we spun it up as, so let's say, if it was a regular company with someone in charge, that person could have personal grudges or like not like a certain protocol because you didn't get into some private sale.
I like this protocol.
Yeah,
right. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. I'm going to include that, and that cannot be an efficient and trustworthy middle layer for that. Like helps get a lot of people into DeFi, because that needs to be sort of impartial, and it needs to sort of rely on the wisdom of the crowds, right? And I think if the DAO can be incentivized and come together to make sure we identify strong risk models that bring something new to the table, we identify good new strategies that are relatively safe and include them into Spool, I think those are like, that's a big responsibility and a lot of work for the DAO as well, to always provide creators with the best and most relevant tools for them to create products for either themselves, for their communities, friends, family, for their app, or even for their own business, right? So a lot of use cases come to mind. I'm sure that I can't even think of half the use cases that are going to end up. We're going to rely on a lot of creativity there, but it's important for that toolbox to be there, not to be able to censor it, and to be impartial, right?
Yeah, the interesting part, obviously, is that it continues to evolve with DeFi. So like I said, even though we're in sort of the first innings, it won't be one of those projects that's sort of left behind, because it just evolves for the tools for whatever is new and necessary. Sure. And I assume that with time, that goes without saying, but people might not understand, the DAO becomes only more decentralized as time passes.
Well, that's the thing, right? Decentralization is hard. Setting up DAOs is really hard. I don't think there's best practices for that. Luckily, within our founding DAO, we've had a bunch of people who are very well versed in setting up DAOs, who by their own account have screwed up a lot of times, and who allowed us to learn from mistakes. And no judgment there, right? Because I'm sure that in retrospect, we will find things that we could have done better as well, because it's a very new thing, right? But they allowed us to sort of get a consensus on what best practices are. And you always have to sort of balance out decentralization. because like just decentralizing from the get-go and just airdropping tokens to 1 million people will never get you to have efficient governance, right? You need to start somewhat decentralized with a good core of people that understand what it's about, who then sort of create a culture for the DAO to operate within. And then from there on out, you decentralize, you bring in more people who then already find a working system and a sort of DAO culture that they can more easily adapt to, instead of pitting in 100,000 people into a room and then tell them, go find your DAO culture, right? It's easier to get people in one by one, have them adopt it, and then grow like that. And I think we found a pretty good middle ground between starting it off too centralized versus starting it off way too decentralized, right? So I think we've got a strong group of people with diverse opinions. There were quite a bit of discussions and quite a bit of disagreement as well, I think. And from there, I think we found a good consensus. And I can't wait for everyone else to have the chance to come in and to contribute their own opinions, because we need them. We need so many eyes on the ground, scout new protocols, come up with new ideas about risk. Also builders that like want to build on top of Spool, that give us input on in terms of what resources they need to build better products, right? All of these things are going to be needed, and everyone will have a place in the DAO and have a voice in the DAO. And I think, I think that's why the way we did it, or the way we set it up, is going to prove very beneficial for Spool in the long run.
It's such an interesting thing to be a part of. Like I said in the beginning, for me, it was as much of believing in the concept, but it's as much of an experiment to experience it. It's hard to explain, but it's almost like being there in the infancy of a nation, right? Like you think about the founding fathers of the United States sitting down and arguing, but actually coming to consensus on the Constitution and then building from there. You can see why the DAO model is so compelling if done correctly. Of course, there's the chance it's done incorrectly, like Constitution DAO, which unfortunately was, of course, we have all these DAOs, and that's the one that makes international news for a week, right? Is the one that completely explodes.
I mean, Constitution DAO, it was interesting to watch, right? I didn't follow how the DAO was set up, but I think it was cool in the way that so I'm not going to speak on like the way it was set up, because I genuinely didn't follow that part, but I think it was really cool how quickly they could rally a community to a common cause. And it really shows the way like communities work and can grow and scale, and like an explosion, if the cause behind it gets people emotionally invested and interested enough, right? But for that to happen, I think, again, the reasoning behind the DAO and the purpose of the DAO needs to be there. And it can't just be, let's hold a token, hopefully it will pump so we can sell it later on for a profit, right? That cannot be the core concept of a DAO. There needs to be a purpose, and that needs to be the poster child of the DAO. And if I had to, if I had to pick a concept for Spool, is work together to enable a whole new generation of DeFi users to come on board. And I think that's a purpose that a lot of people hopefully can identify with. And I think everyone has something they can contribute to it. But as a whole, it's such a big undertaking that no one can do it on their own, like buying the Constitution, right? And that's why we need to come together, pitch in, and then make this future happen for everyone, right? So that's the whole purpose behind it.
Sadly, one guy was able to do that on his own, and it had to be Ken Griffin, of course, but we won't get into that. Certainly.
This is massive trolling.
Yeah. So the biggest, the $42 million troll of all time. Yeah. But this leads obviously to the next question, which is where is it at now? And at what point, can people gain access to it, become a part of the DAO, use the product?
Yeah.
What's coming next?
Great question. I mean, we've been building in silence for quite a long time, because I think we've seen that in 2017, 2018, big ICO raises with just a white paper and then no token utility for ages. tends to maybe not work out that well. So we've decided to kind of stay quiet, work in the background. As you know, it was good that we didn't announce anything because we've had a few delays and had a few changes of scope and improvements that we had to make. But finally, I think we're very close to releasing the product, and we're also ready to open up governance. So the timeline is like this. So on the 13th of December, we're going to start the fair launch auction on Copper. Copper launch through a balancer LVP. Everyone can participate in that openly. I've been asked, is there any limits, or do I have to be like a VC or something? No, it's open to everyone, equally, same terms. Everyone gets the same deal there. And then we're going to transfer governance from this sort of pre-DAO that we've got going right now to the real token holders. So there's immediate utility for everyone that buys Spool tokens in the LVP, and they can immediately participate in governance after it's transferred. And similarly, because a DAO should operate that way, all the funds raised through the LVP, they don't go into anyone's pockets. No one in the DAO gets a single cent of that. It all goes to the DAO treasury that still lays dormant, right? So to this day, the DAO treasury lays dormant, and it's intended for only one purpose: to be governed by Spool DAO members, which are the Spool token holders ultimately, right? No company, no nothing behind it. After the governance is transferred, I think we're ready to soon deploy the first version of Spool on mainnet, and that will be done it's slated right now for February. Obviously, it's going to be subject to a governance vote as well to deploy it. And there will be reports from the builder team, but the ultimate decision is up to the DAO, as it should be. But right now, the product is finished and it's going through audits, because security is obviously going to be a major concern. A product that focuses on risk management and diversification needs to obviously, as first step, look into the mirror and make sure, hey,
so true.
I'm the product where it starts. So before I judge anyone else on their risk, right, better check my own risk. And there's also going to be a bug bounty running after the product release. So security is taken very, very seriously. And yeah, we're going to take it as far as the DAO wants us to take it.
So the short answer, obviously, is December 13th is people's first chance to start to participate. And where can they get more information and follow along and start to be a part of the conversation?
So obviously follow Twitter. That's where all the relevant announcements are posted. If you want to get more involved, which I can only encourage, join our Discord. It's very active, very strong community already forming. We have multiple activities going on. We have the Spool Academy, where I essentially just jump into a Discord channel and talk about a certain topic twice a week. And it's very open for questions, so everyone can come in, talk to us, interact, give suggestions, and so on. And then on the fun side, we have the Spool Olympics going on, which is sort of a series of games that are also helping you to familiarize yourself with Spool, but also sometimes they're just pure fun, right? And participation always helps. There's cool Discord roles to be gained, and who knows what more, right? So I encourage everyone to participate, pay attention. And yeah, those two are the ones that I would encourage to everyone. And then also read our docs. A ton of work went into them. You've seen them, a ton of work. It's basically encyclopedic. A lot of people tell me, I went into this and I came out not knowing, not just as an expert in Spool, but also I've learned a lot about DeFi itself, because we truly try to keep it in a way that educates people about DeFi in general, not just about Spool. So check those out.
That was one of the documents are one of my favorite parts thus far, and it was a heavy read, but as you said, it's sort of a, when I go back to the question of, how would your beginner get into this, you could literally just point them to those docs and say, here's DeFi, a basic understanding. And this is,
and there's a search function.
Yeah,
there's a search function too, so you can kind of break it up. I think it's broken up into manageable pieces as well. But check those out, ask questions. Everyone in the community is going to help you. A lot of people have gone from zero to Spool experts in a very short time, and it's such an active community. They just help you. They answer every question, so everyone's welcome. No question is too stupid. Just come in, join in, and everyone's appreciated, because a DAO lives and dies by its community, right? And everyone can be a part.
Absolutely. So guys, just so you know, that Twitter is at Spoolfi, SPOOLFI. And you can find the information on the Telegram, Medium, Discord,
Exactly.
find those docs all through that Twitter. Well, Philipp, thank you so much for taking the time to share all of this. It's funny, even being a part of it, I learn something every time I dig into it further and sort of have more ideas and thoughts. And I think that this is something that the community can really get behind and be passionate about. So I'm excited to see it start to really come to fruition over the next few months publicly.
Yeah, me too. Thanks for having me on, Scott. Thanks everyone for listening. Take care.